Try to get some pity views out of the boys.
Should have put a donate button on the Twitch and tell Jim to drop a few racks.
Ooh, so now for some reason I didn't have to refresh the YouTube, but like the logo has like a live button.
Interesting. Good. Makes it easier.
That makes it easier, yeah. I gotta turn down my brightness. Let me test YouTube sound though. Okay, cool. That is crazy how delayed that is, but it is what it is.
All right, you ready to get started?
Yes, sir.
Hello and welcome to episode 132 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we finally get the confirmation of the super team that might spell the end of OPTIC's championship repeat claim. I don't know, and or Atlanta FAZE trying to rise back up and become world champions again. So we get confirmation of that. We got some beef out of that confirmation, and we have some reports and rumors that we'll talk about a little bit later in the show. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm all right. It's been a little bit since our last show. I wanted to go live earlier, like Preston talking about the 100 Thieves, LAT stuff, but other stuff has been going on and getting in the way. But we're live now, so we're just basically going to break down everything since this is October 16th of our recording. Our last show is September 22nd, so we got about 3+ weeks stuff of roster mania to break down. So hope you guys are ready for the show, and yeah, we're back.
So, like you said, we did that show on the 22nd, as is tradition. A few days afterward, LA Thieves, they officially announced their roster, because at the time we were just talking about this is the report that seems like it's going to be the case. A few days later, on September 26th, the Los Angeles Thieves announced that Ghosty will be returning in 2024-25. I don't know when the season is even going to start at this point. So Ghosty, Scrappy, Hydra, and Envoy will be their roster moving forward. Really kind of blowing up we're going to be profitable. We're trying to be conscientious about how much we're spending. And that's some stuff that we really talked about in last episode. But now that it's official and we know this roster, we know, most likely OPTIC is not going to change unless something major happened, and probably the same with FAZE. I think it's pretty clear that those are the top three. If you had to pick, obviously we don't know what Black Ops 6 is going to play like, at least in terms of the competitive aspect, especially over a year-long season. But where would you put LAT now with this roster in relation to Atlanta and OPTIC?
Yeah, I mean, as of now, I think the best way to break it down would be similar to last season, how the continual narrative all season was there was a 4-team league. I think this move basically gives us a 3-team league at this point, and I think OPTIC, FAZE, and LA Thieves are going to be like the S tier teams or the top three in pretty interchangeable order. I mean, even last year we saw most of the top teams winning an event here and there, so could be a similar scenario where like we get like instead of like the square we get kind of like a triangle where like OPTIC beats FAZE beats LA Thieves beat OPTIC. Obviously that's just an example, but something like that where it's kind of like a revolving door of the quote unquote top team, even though all three of these teams are inarguably championship contenders and have the potential to win on any given Sunday. Like you said, we don't know much about Black Ops 6 yet and what the game's going to be like, what the meta is going to be like. So one of these teams could run away with it, but barring something drastic happening here and the rest of roster mania, it seems like these are the top three dogs, and it's going to be the rest of the teams fighting for the scraps. Not no pun intended. uh, Underneath that, so definitely, like you said, a move by LA Thieves that when it was first rumored and whatnot, I know I was a little skeptical just because of what we had talked about in a couple episodes now of 100 Thieves as an organization wanting to hit profitability or at least like break even and that business talk. And obviously this is a move that definitely cost them a pretty penny. And if they don't win some titles this year, then it'll be interesting where 100 Thieves and LA Thieves go from here. But uh, I don't think they're worried about that now. They got the team they want. Obviously, Nade's really excited about it, and I think it's going to be good for the scene that not that LA Thieves wasn't a competitive team last year, especially towards the end of last year where they were playing well at champs and the Esports World Cup, and we've sung their praises, said how you want to be playing your best COD at the end of the year, where the biggest tournaments are, all that yada yada. Um, but I think end of the day, it's better for COD esports when 100 Thieves and LA Thieves are like this championship contender caliber team just because of the fan base and um, the potential rivalries and storylines and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's no no bad blood with Toronto. There's bad blood obviously with LAT and Toronto, but like I don't have any ill will toward Toronto, so I'm not necessarily rooting against them. But I agree with you that when you have OPTIC, when you have FAZE, LAT, these are all organizations that are tied to Call of Duty. Obviously, 100 Thieves is a lot much younger of an organization than the other two, but just Nadeshot being the founder kind of connects them to competitive COD more than any other org really can at its core. But yeah, those three teams being competitive and potentially being the championship contenders throughout an entire season is very exciting, just like we saw with last season where we did have those four teams. And it was exciting because you didn't really know exactly how things would go between those four teams. We did see for most of the season that New York was kind of lagging behind everybody else. And then at the end of the season, they decided to kind of wake up and become, a legitimate championship contender that nearly won the world championship, obviously making it to the grand finals of champs. But this season, it's kind of all over the place, I think, and obviously we will know more as Black Ops 6, gets revealed, and we see the beta, we see how the competitive players are playing, and even then, you're not really going to get what we really need to see until probably January, February, where players are really getting into a groove with these games. If I had to put, obviously, I would probably just put OPTIC at the top because you kind of have to lose that spot, at least in my opinion right now. But there's a pretty good case for LAT to be over FaZe, but I don't think that there's a huge gap between any of those three teams, at least on paper. I was just looking at the all-star teams, obviously, that were voted on at the end of last season. And so now FaZe has obviously 3 all-stars because they haven't changed their roster, Celium, Simp, and Draza. And now LAT would have 2 all-stars with Scrappy and Hydra. OPTIC has 2 all-stars in Dashy and Shotzi. The only all-star that isn't on one of those 3 teams is Kleenex. And obviously he is still on Toronto. So we're going to really see how Toronto kind of picks up the pieces. What it's looking like at the moment for Toronto, it actually confirmed, is Kleenex staying with Insight. So that was kind of the pair. I know that you love Kleenex, and I think Insight is an incredible player, like probably really underrated, if we're being honest. So those 2 are staying on Toronto, and Beans is joining, and Joe Deceives is joining. So Joe Deceives and Scrap kind of swap places. Joe Deceives going from LAT to Toronto, and Beans coming in from kind of a season a little bit all over the place just because he was in Boston. He finished the World Cup with Carolina, and now he's with Toronto. This roster, what do you make of it? Like, I think on paper it's certainly not on that tier of the top 3, but where, I guess, in that next tier are they? Do you think they're kind of a solid 4th roster, or where are you seeing them?
I don't think 4th right off the bat, but definitely like a low A tier or high B tier sort of deal. And we'd have to wait until all the rosters are confirmed and really break it down. The one thing I'm personally keeping my eye on with this team is Beans. I think he can be the X factor, just in the sense that like I just really quickly looked at those other teams he's been on, and obviously there hasn't been a ton of success for those teams. But when he was on Boston, his other AR was Awakening, and towards uh, the end of this past season, he played with Priesta and Major Maniac, and obviously I think highly of those guys. But I think from like an AR, like a leadership perspective, this will be like a test for Insight, and it'll be interesting to see what Insight can bring out of Beans. If maybe like Insight takes sort of like a back seat in like the slaying uh, category to just kind of like let Beans go do what he wants, and uh, he just does the dirty work. And that's kind of what we've seen out of Insight, really, I feel like, with Scrap recently. So it'll be interesting to see if, like, the Toronto camp and just the Kleenex Insight duo that's remaining there is able to bring out the best of Beans. And obviously, it's going to be almost impossible at this stage to replace someone like Scrap, who's just been, an unsung MVP candidate these past 2 years, Rookie of the year before, and a really solid player. But, um, I've seen good things out of Beans, and I'm not going to say that he can do what Scrap has been doing, but maybe that's just that, I feel like we've had times over the last couple of years where we've questioned the Toronto roster decisions and moves, and it always like they're always able to make it work to some extent. I mean, even someone like Hicksy, who again, that's a guy who they bring in and isn't dropping 1.4 KDs, but he's dropping a point 0.9 and doing the work necessary, and they win a championship in his short time, and then they make the finals of champs. Um, so yeah, it's obviously you can say what you want about the squad. Obviously, it is a quote unquote downgrade when you're bringing almost anybody in for Scrap. But that's I got my eyes on Beans here to see what he's able to do. He's had a couple chances now, like you said, with Carolina and with Boston. So will be interesting to see what he can do. Obviously, I like Joe Deceives too. How him and Kleenex work is sort of like a sub duo. Will be interesting to see, but. Yeah, when you hear like the stories behind the scenes, I think I watched like Scrap's video after they joined LAT, and they were talking like almost immediately after the World Cup. Scrap said that Toronto management was like, "Yeah, you guys are all able to explore your options. We don't think we're going to be able to afford you guys." And he didn't say afford, but he was like, "We don't think we're going to be able to keep the team." And Scrap was like, "Is there any way that we can stay together?" And he said that the org was like, "Yeah," but he said it was like really like a hesitant yeah, and it was basically it wasn't going to happen. So that's what made me think it was sort of like a money thing, where Toronto was like, "Yeah, we're trying to cut costs here, trying to, you know." Make some moves to trim how much we're spending, and it makes sense that someone like Scrap, who they could potentially lose. We've talked about Pred in Seattle, right? Seattle didn't get anything. It sounds like I think there were reports of like very lenient buyouts between 100 Thieves in Toronto, but obviously we don't know the full extent of it. Either way, they got something for
Yeah.
Scrap, even if it was a very small amount or not what you would expect for a star player of Scrap's caliber. Um, but yeah, and end of the day, I think Toronto, when they got the tissue on that squad, they got the potential for him to just pop off in any moment. It's a different cast of guys around him, though, outside of Insight, obviously. Um, and we'll just have to see what those guys are able to do together. But I don't think, obviously they were in that top four conversation all last year. Don't think they're quite there at this point, but we don't know all the rosters and everything yet, so we'll have that full debate about where we rank them heading into the season later on.
Beans, it seems like he's been around for a while, but he actually hasn't had that much CDL experience. Obviously, he played a little bit near the back half of the season last year, when you were talking about it, and they end up going to champs, finishing sixth. That roster of Big Wig, Beans, Kremp, and Snoopy. Obviously, like that roster's all split up at this point, and all different ways, and he didn't really get much of a shot this year. He came in for a little bit toward the end of the year again with Boston. Obviously that team was horrendous, and I think that's a bad situation for any any player to come into a team that is at the very bottom. They were pretty much mathematically eliminated from playoff contention, even when Beans came in, and it's just like a pretty low expectation for the entire team. So I'm obviously this is the biggest stage for him, right? To be on a team that has made champs grand finals a few times, has a lot of really good players, and same for Joe DeCeves. Joe, this was his second season in the CDL this past year. He even got benched during the year, came back to the starting lineup, and obviously finished out really well with LAT. So I'm interested to see how those two in particular are able to fit with Insight and Kleenex, who have really developed a great chemistry over the past few years and have had a lot of success together. But what you were saying about Scrap and the money situation with Toronto, I think they almost confirmed it, like at whatever that was 3-4 weeks ago, where they said like, yeah, like we're exploring options. Like we have to kind of shift with how things are changing in Call of Duty esports, especially because when they started the CDL, they were one of the teams that was like, all right, let's sign 10 guys and let's make 2 rosters within one. And we're going to have all of these players kind of swapping in and out. We're going to have a huge coaching staff. And that's just not the reality of Call of Duty esports anymore. Nobody really has subs on a consistent basis. And they have to kind of work with that. But I still think this team could be pretty good. Obviously, there's always the chance that one of those top 3 teams, Atlanta, LAT, or OPTIC, they will play each other in the winners round 2 and knock each other out basically before they can get to the top 3. And then you can kind of slide in. We've seen Minnesota do that a few times. We've seen a few different teams actually do that where excuse me, you get all those points that are very valuable, especially as you get toward the end of the season. So maybe Toronto can do that during this season. Do you want to talk about the hoodie org drama? Because we did mention Toronto's CEO. I just thought it was a silly thing, but yeah, like I don't know why a CEO would say it, but it's probably something that Nate Shot himself would say, or Hex would say, like just one of those things where it's just executives kind of talking crap and it kind of backfires in a little way. So what did you think?
I thought it was hilarious that they like made a link that went to hoodie sales, this being LA Thieves, and they had the name of the CEO as a code to give you 10% off. I thought that was just a hilarious way for 100 Thieves to react. I think that we probably could have had more to say about this if we were going live closer to when this happened. But yeah, it was just a funny thing, and especially in an off season that's been a little bit on the slower side, it was some good entertainment.
And Methods, obviously retired Call of Duty Pro streamer with OPTIC now. He announced that he is launching Zin City, a challengers team for this upcoming season. He said on Twitter, full funding, 100% prize winnings to the players, no contracts, and I will personally coach the team multiple times a week. I think Zuma has done this, sort of thing with the Stallions, but it's always great. Obviously, we've talked about how little challengers is funded just in general, but to see a player who, I don't know how much Methods would have been in challengers, like since challengers actually became a thing, but I'm assuming that it was, he was there probably a few times, maybe in between teams, but it's always great to see a player actually support some up and coming players that really could, it could pay dividends down the line, not for that player necessarily, but for the players who really need the help, and that aren't going to get the chance, they're not going to be able to pay their own way. I think this is a great opportunity. I didn't know if you had anything on it.
Yeah, I think obviously we're not going to see someone like Scump do this. I don't think. I think obviously with the ties to Optic and just how big he is, and especially obviously I don't know Scump personally, but with everything we've heard in like content and stuff over the years, I know he's joked about it, and like Hex has joked about it, and even his mom on like Eavesdrop episodes with Hex, they've talked about how Scump just doesn't like to spend money. So it's not something I would expect from him. But seeing some of these other pros like Methods and like Zuma, like you mentioned, wanting to invest in challengers, even if it's just a little bit, that's really cool. And I think from like a content perspective, like if we see Methods team play Zuma's team, for example, in this upcoming series, if Zuma's doing a team again, like that could, if those two guys hop into a call and they're live on Twitch and they're streaming the matches, that's potentially getting eyes on that match that wouldn't have been watching it before. There's going to be funny back and forth between Methods and Zuma. Those are two hilarious guys, and they have a good relationship and dynamic like that. So, I think this is something uh, that's really only a positive. Obviously, I don't think there's really any benefit to it for Methods outside of like that content aspect of it, and from like if he's streaming the stuff and getting views from it. But like from monetary perspective, he's basically doing this to at least it seems like to me he's doing it to try and help some other people get an opportunity they might not have otherwise got, sort of like you mentioned there. So will be interesting to see what kind of team he gets together. It's definitely one I'm going to keep an eye on.
Any more attention, extra eyeballs on challengers teams is always good. And he obviously has a huge platform that he can use that effectively. Miami, the Heretics, they officially confirmed. I don't know what the correct verb here would be, but Lucky, Real, Metals, Vickle, and Rancor. Rancor, he came in August, or like he signed with Miami in August. So they're sticking with the 5-man roster. What do you think about that? Because that was obviously kind of a thing that started. I'm trying to think of the names off the top of my head, but it started at the beginning of last season.
So it was Lucky, Metals, Vickle, Journey, and Eric Boom were the 5 last year.
So they started with that. They didn't reveal whether anybody was a starter necessarily. It seemed like a kind of a miscommunication a little bit at the beginning of the season. They swapped out a few players. They ended up signing Real after he left the Carolina Ravens. But they're sticking with a 5-man roster heading into this season. What do you think about that? Do you like it? Or, they're really the only team that's really doing this at this point.
Yeah, I think it works for them, especially in the, we know they want a Spanish team or a Spanish-speaking team. And for that like reason, it makes it a little more difficult for them to potentially pick up players during the ongoing season and whatnot. So having someone there in case things go wrong like they did early last year and they can kind of swap people in, I think that benefits them. It will be interesting, kind of like you said, we don't know right now who the 5 players will be. I think, I mean, it feels like you can't really take out Real just after how the team improved once they started playing with him and getting more reps with him towards the end of last year. Um, I think the early rumor going around was that it's going to be Vickle who's going to be on the bench, and Rancor will be in for him with Real, Lucky, and Metals. But obviously, like you said last year, it was that people thought it was going to be Eric Boom starting the year, and then Journey ended up starting. I do remember now. Journey like tweeted like he was going to be playing in Challengers or something, and then they were like, no, we're going to start with Journey. Then Journey got subbed out. Eric Boom came in. Eric Boom didn't last, I don't think, more than like one cycle or one major. And then they got Real after his visa situation with Carolina and all that got resolved. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see what Miami's able to do this year with this squad. But, we talked about it back when he was originally signed. We don't know much about Rancor, but if a team like Heretics is willing to give him a chance in the CDL, it'll be interesting to see what he's able to do, and we'll have to go from there.
So that's as far as we know in terms of reported rosters or confirmed rosters, excuse me. We have some reports and rumors, just kind of speed run some of these because we've already talked a little bit about some of these teams or parts of these teams. So Minnesota is looking at Estriel, Geo, Paul X, and Nero, and then there's the possibility of players like Arcides, Clayster, and Hugh.
So it was initially like Arcides, Hook, Estriel, and Paul X, I think, and they were talking about Clay and Geo. And then it went to like Estriel and Geo were there, and we didn't know who was going to be there, and I think it was Estriel, Geo, and Hook looking for one, and then the Hook thing fell through, and it was Paul X and Nero. So
It's like
been a lot of
challengers.
reports. Yeah, it's been a lot of reports on that over. Really, Nero and Mac. We'll talk about Mac in a second here. Nero and Mac have been the names that have been linked to several teams this offseason, but it seems like now Nero could wind up on this squad with Minnesota, and I think for this team, I mean, guys like Estriel who are in the conversation for Rookie of the Year last year, um, a guy like Gio who I thought should have been given more consideration for Rookie of the Year, but he didn't play a full season in the CDL. So if this roster comes to fruition, this will be like his first full year starting the season right away in the CDL. Be excited for that. And even a guy like Paul X, who he's been one of those players I don't think has been on a team to start a season in the CDL. He's always been like a mid-season pickup, it feels like. So,
Yeah.
um, will be interesting to see how this roster gels together. But I do like the dynamic there of Gio and Nero, and we did see them play together last year on the now defunct Vegas Legion. So, um, yeah, not there's a team. I think it's definitely one on the cheaper side. Probably some guys on contracts close to what the minimum was before, which we can talk about that too.
Spoiler alert.
Um, yeah, um, but yeah, this isn't a team that I would have super high on my tier list if I was to make one right now. But it's a team that definitely has some players I like and has some potential.
Let's talk about Mac because, um, I mean, he seems like he had a few options he could really have taken here. Carolina, it seemed like was going to be Mac, Slasher, TJ, and Gwen. Now it seems like it's going to be Vivid instead of Mac, and Mac instead going to Cloud9, formerly the New York Subliners, which let's talk about New York first, or Cloud9, whatever they're calling themselves. So Mac, Sib, Attach, and Crimp is the rumored / reported roster. That's a very interesting team. Obviously, Sib would be the lone holdover from the New York Subliners team. Then you have Attach, who finished with the Vegas Legion. Kremp obviously had a very good end to his season with LAT, and Mac has been, he was with New York originally, like a few years ago. That's kind of where he had like his breakout. Then he went to Seattle, spent a few years. So, what do you make of this reported C9 roster?
Yeah, I think I was I kind of like the idea of Nero on this team. Uh, when that was initially reported or rumored, however you want to phrase it. I just thought like from a slaying standpoint, like Nero and Sid both have that potential to be pop off players at any given time, really. So I kind of liked that idea. And now with Mac, I have a little bit of, yeah, obviously just didn't compete last year. I don't remember if he tweeted the reason. It might have been something to do
I
with
thought it was his
family
mom.
or health. Yeah, I didn't want to say it was his mom just in case it wasn't, but
I'm almost positive
something
that
was
was.
going on, and he didn't compete last year at the pro league. Maybe he played towards the end of the year. I don't really remember, but so there's just inevitably going to be question marks around Mac coming back in after some period of time away from top competitive play. So questions there, and just we saw some good things from Kremp on LA Thieves at the end of last year, but just like from a consistent slaying perspective, I don't really know about a sub duo of Kremp and Mac. Again, obviously we don't really know the meta and all that yada yada. But from an AR perspective, I do like pairing Sib with Attach. I feel like Attach and C9 are kind of like a pair made in heaven or whatever the phrase there is. I butchered
Match made
that.
in
But
heaven.
match made in heaven. Yeah, thank you. We've talked about it numerous times over the years about Attach and just what he brings to an org and everything like that from a branding perspective, content perspective. So I think him and C9 match up well on in that regard. And I think from gameplay's perspective, like as Attach becomes more of a seasoned veteran now, and we've seen him more using an AR. Um, he can kind of make the fundamental plays with an AR and just let Sib go around the map and just get kills. And that's what Sib wants to do. It really, like, from watching him play over the years, it's he wants to just drop numbers and kill everybody in front of him. So, I think they should be on paper. They feels like that's a strong AR duo, but the sub play is going to be a question mark for me. Obviously, people can prove me wrong, and what we still got to see what the meta is. I think if this is a AR heavy meta that favors a team like C9 pretty well, because we've seen Mac, and obviously last year with the ACR we saw, like, at times people using 4 ARs. If so we've seen Kremp using an AR. If that's a similar situation with Black Ops 6, like that could favor a team like C9, just based on what we've seen the players do with multiple guns over the years and ARs to be specific. But yeah, we'll have to see how it shakes out for them.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good roster on paper. Definitely in contention for like that fourth seed, or the fourth, fifth kind of middle of the pack. But even then, last season we had a bunch of those teams, and nobody could kind of solidify themselves as that fifth team outside of the top four. So that might be the case this year. And some of these rosters kind of all blend together. They look like, there's like you kind of said with the question marks, like there's usually at least one question mark per team. And I think just the fact that we didn't see Mac last year, like the fact that he was just completely gone, there's always going to be some kind of question whether he's going to be able to be himself, or what we saw of him last. So I guess we'll have to see. Let's go back to Carolina real quick. Gwen, TJ, Slasher, Vivid. Obviously, TJ and Slasher back together, which is interesting. Gwen, rookie of the year, definitely the real bright spot for Carolina last year. And then Vivid, who has been on a few teams, one of the fastest, like most engagement heavy players in the entire league. How do you see this roster kind of matching up here?
Yeah, I think from like a fundamental standpoint, this is a team I'm excited to see how it shakes out. It's interesting because it's kind of similar on paper to the way they tried to form a team last year, right? Like Slasher and Clay, from just like being that veteran main AR. Uh, that kind of similar in that regard, but the one that's not necessarily super similar is Vivid, just because we think of him more as an SMG player now. I believe, like, the rumor or report going on was that he was going to try to run an AR in challengers, and he might be like the flex or AR on this team. But then there was also talks about potentially being TJ. So I don't know what potentially from a role standpoint is going on there. The one thing, conversely to what I was just saying about C9, this is a team that if Black Ops 6 is a heavy SMG meta, if you have the three subs as Gwen, TJ, and Vivid, and just Slasher as the lone AR, I think that could be a meta that definitely favors this lineup. And obviously, we'll have to see what happens with the game, and if all that talk about Vivid potentially running an AR or whatnot is true or whatnot. But I do like Vivid getting an opportunity here. I think Vivid is one of those players that I've liked for a couple years now, and liked his play style. And there's just been that weird. It felt like he was like kind of in a circle where he was getting on the same team. It was almost like that Florida and Boston, and like that team with like Awakening, and I can't even think of
It's
who
like
else it was that it was
Skies,
somebody,
right?
but it was somebody else that he was on the same team in multiple years, and Skies wasn't on Boston, so that's why I can't think of who it was. But so it might have just been Vivid and Awakening that I'm thinking of now. But it felt like he was on a team, and then he wasn't on a team. Then he like kind of repaired with Awakening again. Then he got off a team. I feel like that we've seen that cycle play out a couple times. So regardless of the specifics, I think it's a good thing for Vivid to sort of like branch out here and get an opportunity with some guys that I don't think he's uh, played with much before. And I do think this is, you know, especially if Vivid is running a sub with Gwyn, I think that's something like Vivid can be that guy who's going out in front, trying to get the first bloods and set the pace, and then Gwyn can sort of follow him up and get the kills. And we saw a lot of good things out of Gwyn as the rookie of the year last year. I'm excited to see what he can do in year two. Will just be interesting to see if this is a roster that brings the best out of him.
Yeah, and whether Vivid ends up having to kind of use that skill set of being a flex and running an AR consistently, I think just in general, SMG players should probably try to branch out and just like at least develop it a little bit, like where they can play an AR when needed, because like you said on this podcast, there was a very heavy AR meta last season. So if you're just like I run sub, that's all I do, that's not as valuable as maybe it would be in other metas. And I think just as you get older, like the players just naturally end up moving more and more to the AR spot, and there aren't usually that many AR spots around the league. So just being able to be or to excel at something like that is really big. So hopefully he's been able to do it, because he's a very exciting player. It's just it hasn't really clicked recently, and that's obviously been probably disappointing for him. The other rumor was Gentlemates, which is reportedly replacing the Los Angeles Guerrillas. Rest in peace, maybe. We'll see about that. The rumored roster there is Skies, Kismet, Priesta, and Linz. So obviously what jumps out to me is 3/4 of the New York Subliners World Championship team in Skies, Kismet, and Priesta. And then Linz, who was a rookie last season for Minnesota. So it seems, it's definitely an interesting roster on paper, because Kismet was Champs MVP when they won the World Championship. Skies has been a very, very solid player for a number of years now. Priesta was kind of the glue guy for New York, but had a down year after leaving the Subliners. And then Linz is, I would say, kind of a question mark, just in the sense that we haven't seen nearly as much of him as we have the other guys. What do you make of this Gentlemates reported roster?
Yeah, I think the thing here is that, if this roster does come to fruition, it's Linz replacing Hydra on that, you know, New York roster that we saw win champs. And the question is, what is Linz capable of? Obviously, it's very hard to compare yourself to Hydra and say, like, ask the question, can Linz do what Hydra did for that New York team, which is be the MVP? And I think the answer there is just no, based on what we've seen out of Linz so far. But obviously, again, first year player, has potential, and it's a question of, maybe these other guys can bring that star, caliber play out of him. But until we see it, it's hard to say that. I do think from just a roster construction factor, it is interesting to see this potentially be the way that Gentlemates goes if Gentlemates enters the league. It's not a bad idea to try and replicate that with Linz being in there for Hydra, I guess. But it will be interesting to see if it works out. It is also interesting from the fact that Gentlemates is the org co-owned by Gotaga, who I always like to say for a long time Call of Duty fans, he's basically French nade shot. And Linz is obviously French, just so is Hydra.
Yeah,
So
that's
you
weird.
can say, like, maybe Linz is like the French phenom junior if Hydra is the French phenom. So that's cool for like a branding perspective and whatnot. If Linz is on this team, but yeah, a lot of pressure on Linz to produce right away if this is the reported roster. I also think this is a big opportunity for Priesta. Given the year he just had on Boston, things didn't really go his way. CDL fans are going to want to see him have a bounce back. And if he doesn't, I feel like if he wasn't getting this opportunity, he was a name that we might not have heard a lot of in Roster Mania this offseason. So will be interesting to see how he produces. And yeah, I mean, obviously and our listeners know what I think of 99 Kiz, but what we saw with Kiz playing alongside Hydra, is Linz going to enable Kiz to do those same things, or is Kismet going to have to step up in the slaying department? Is he able to do that and on a consistent basis? Lot of questions around this roster if it comes to fruition, but it is an exciting one for me. Just one that could have, sort of like you said with C9, have the potential to be in the upper echelon of the league, but it's also a roster that could fail if things don't go their way. So yeah, a lot of questions around this team, but it is interesting.
So just to recap where we are with the rosters, obviously a bunch of these are not confirmed. They are reported or rumored or otherwise just not official. So Minnesota right now is looking like Nero, Paulex, Geo, and Estriel. And then you would have Cloud9 as Attach, Crimp, Mac, and Sib. Optic staying the same to Ashley Kenny, Pred, and Shotzi. Toronto is Beans, Kleenex, Insight, and Joe Deceives. The Vancouver Surge, not the Seattle Surge. 04, Abuza, Hixie, and Nasty. And then the Vegas Falcons, the all-Saudi team, Saudi X, I don't know how to say it, Exnid, King of Bodhi, and Roxas. Miami Heretics, 5-man roster, Lucky Metals, Real, Rincor, and Vickle. LAT, Envoy, Ghosty, Hydra, and Scrap. Gentlemates, like we just talked about, Kiz, Linz, Priesta, Skies, Carolina, Gwen, Mac, Slasher, TJ. Boston, which they really haven't changed. I don't think anything from that World Cup team. Cammy, Big Wake, Purge, and Snoopy. And of course, FaZe hasn't changed either. Simp, Celium, Draza, and Abizi. So obviously, again, not confirmed, but you can see that the CDL is taking shape for this next season. The rosters are starting to take form. Not a ton of challengers talent coming up. I think in years past we have seen quite a few rookies. Obviously, I'm not counting like Vegas in general because that's a unique situation, and like I wouldn't count Miami in that from last season either. Like where they have like a bunch of new players. That's not like typical challengers talents ascending into a CDL role. I'm actually trying to look to see. I guess Hixie is coming back to the CDL after spending time in challengers. But there's,
I don't think the Vancouver roster has been confirmed.
Yeah, I'm just saying if,
Twitter,
yeah, if he is going to be part of a CDL roster, he's pretty much the only guy that was in challengers last season. Even Mac wasn't in challengers; he wasn't competing. I don't see one off that jumps off the screen to me.
Purge was on the roster.
Yeah,
at the start
some of these guys were like Cammy was on and off.
Too, yeah. So yeah, I think for like from a rookie perspective, I guess Paul X for Minnesota, he was on the team that won Challengers Champs last year with our cities. So I guess from like a rookie of the year standpoint, the only candidates at the start of the year, if these rosters all hold, would be Rencor and then the 4 Vegas players.
Yeah, I mean that pretty small rookie of the year field, but
that's definitely never happened in any of the previous seasons. So if I had to be a betting man, I would probably say that a mid-season pickup, if there's one who hasn't played before, would be in contention for rookie of the year. But then again, we saw this last year with like Geo. He wasn't really considered, I feel like, just because he didn't play the full season, right? So that'll be interesting.
Well, you have to pretty much be like hands down the best rookie and just absolutely destroying people if you're going to play whatever 60% of the season. And it, really we're not looking at team results either because Carolina was not very good last year, but Gwen was still the rookie of the year and, deservedly so in my opinion. So we're going to see. It's going to be interesting. It does leave, obviously, granted, not official, but you think of players like Clayster. Where does that leave him? I think it leaves him out on the outside looking in. Other players like Gunless. There's a bunch of other players that I can't think of off the top of my head, but I know that we're missing people from last season that it's going to be interesting. Obviously some of them will certainly come in at some point in the year. That's just how things usually happen. But it does seem like, we're not going to see some of the same faces heading into next season.
if you look at I'm just looking at Champs 2024 last year, and the only names of players who wouldn't be in the CDL from the 8 teams that made champs are
It's
Hook and
Diamond.
Brezzy on Seattle, and then Diamondcom Fame and Flames from LAG.
Yeah.
The top 6 teams from champs, all of those players would be remaining in the CDL, which I don't know how many times in previous years you could say the same thing.
Yeah, so looking at the final rosters for the entire CDL, the ones that jump out to me, obviously Clay is the big one, just
Yeah,
because he's a
yeah.
legend. But we talked about it. I think when he got released from Carolina before the World Cup, was this the last time that we would see him play? Especially when they didn't make the playoffs for champs. But there's obviously Clayster's a big one. Standy is, I think, an interesting one if he's not going to be on a roster. Gunless is not like incredibly surprising, but he's a big name. Major Maniac is somebody who's been in the league seemingly every year. Diamond Con, like you mentioned, and Hook is a big one because he is a former world champion, and it did seem like Seattle was kind of you know they were better than. And now that I think about it, where's Illy? If he because he is
There's
someone
been
that he's kind of said that he wants to play again. So where does he fit in?
there were some clips going around of like Shotzi talking on stream that like he knows what is going on, but he doesn't want to say too much, and he's trying to get him help and stuff. So that's a developing situation, and we don't have all the details. I didn't put the clips in here because I
Yeah.
didn't know we were going to talk about it, but uh, there's been a bunch of stuff around that. The other name that we didn't mention that I just saw too is Accuracy. Um,
Did
there was
Accuracy he
obviously
announced that he's retiring?
I don't think so. I think we just know that he was released by Minnesota at the end of the year. Um, and obviously there were those like don't want to say. I don't think it was really reported. I think it was more rumors and whatnot that actually was potentially helping Optic from a coaching standpoint
Mm,
before champs. And now on that graphic that we have here from CDL Intel from September 16th, they have Agassi as a potential coach for Cloud9 New York. Obviously, we know he has a good relationship with Attach, so like that wouldn't surprise me if Agassi does make the move to coaching and is a coach for Cloud9 New York. But yeah, that's another name there of a longtime player who might not be on a roster, but he could be moving on to coaching. So that'll be one to keep an eye on too.
well, not only attached, but if it's Mac and Sib, he played with both of them with Seattle
True.
like quite recently. So having that familiarity might be a pretty good thing. Now that you mentioned the coaches, like at least this, like there's question marks obviously, so they're not confirmed or anything. But for Gentlemates, D Real and Marky B are listed on that graphic as the coaches of Gentlemates. Obviously, D Real was the coach for the New York Subliners, Marky B
Yeah.
most recently for LA Gorillas, but more notably for the Toronto Ultra. Sender, possibly an assistant coach for LAT.
He was
Uh,
confirmed.
oh, so confirmed on that. And that's about the most surprising thing, I think.
There was a report too that Mayhem, who's a former player I know for like E6 and has been recently a Challengers
Yeah.
coach, could be helping Carolina from a coaching perspective too. Um, Still a lot of stuff going around on the rumors reports front, and nothing really confirmed outside of what we said has been confirmed. So we'll have to wait to see how everything, if it's finalized and whatnot.
Yeah, the next 2 3 months will be interesting just on the finalization of some of this stuff because there's no reason to really rush into it at this point unless you think that you're going to get this coach stolen or this player stolen by another team if you don't do it now.
I will say that we're, you know, at, as of recording, we're just a little over a week away from Black Ops 6. Um, Obviously, over the last few years, we haven't had as much streaming of scrims as we have in previous years, but feels like teams are a little more lenient when it first starts out. And even if teams aren't fully streaming scrims, it feels like some individual players are to some extent. And then there are like the screenshots that surface on Twitter of like, oh my God, these are the four players playing together in scrims, so we know like they're the team, all that. So, um, exciting time, and even if stuff isn't fully officially announced by orgs, we should have a pretty good idea of what we can expect the rosters to be, uh, at least by like next weekend.
Yeah.
Once we start to see like kickoff tournaments, hopefully, and streams and all that.
Another name to watch out for coaching would be JCap, because
Yep.
not with LAT anymore, moved back to the East Coast. Obviously there's not that many teams on the East Coast like actually competing, but even remotely he could help out with coaching and or be an assistant coach or something like that. But I brought him up because of the streaming scrims thing. So he tweeted a few weeks ago. This is a take that I never would have had until like a year or two ago, but I actually think players streaming scrims every day would be one of the best things for players in the scene as a whole. I don't know, like this is what fans have been saying for literally years, I think. Now JCap is kind of on the other side. He's not as protective. He doesn't have a team that he's kind of protecting, and some of the strategies. And I don't really know if it's so much strategy sometimes, more as just the criticism that comes with making mistakes in practice, that teams just don't want their players to be focused on them getting roasted by their Twitch chat. I think that has a factor in it. What did you think of this tweet by JCap? Because I saw it and I was like, well, yeah, but I guess it's a step in the right direction if one of the greatest Call of Duty players of all time and a very recent coach is thinking along these lines.
Yeah, I think sort of like you said, I feel like teams, especially at the beginning of the game, where yeah, you can see like what teams are doing, but everybody's trying to learn the game at the very start. So it makes a little more sense that teams are more lenient right when the game first releases. And I just think streaming scrims is really good content and can be, you know, there is a balance you have to strike because again, you don't want somebody like, screaming and yelling at a teammate over something very small in practice to try and like get Twitch chat and get clips and views and all that stuff. Um, but if you can strike a good balance between streaming the scrims and having it be constructive criticism in practice and learning the game and whatnot, I think it can only really benefit, the scene as a whole. I do think there is, to some extent, obviously, how much I like search and destroy. Um, it 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 gets tough. I've never been a huge fan of like people covering the mini map for like search and destroy because I feel like, once you start playing the game, you can kind of like see where players are going off the break, even if you don't have the mini map to see the arrows and whatnot. You can still get kind of an idea of how the teams are setting up, but obviously there are better minds than me, and if they think there's a good enough reason to hide the mini map there, then uh, they all power to them. But um, nonetheless, I do think if you can strike the balance between uh, the stream not affecting the quality of the practice and causing drama and etc. And then that can be uh, good content and a good way to build a fan base and all that stuff. Like JCap said, like helping fans get to know the players better, especially in this day and age where it's not the same play. Like we're just talking
Yeah.
about Clay potentially not being on a team, right? Like uh, those streams of like 2Ks and 5Ks back in the day were content, and yeah, there were arguments and stuff that you probably didn't want happening,
Certainly
but
should
those are
not
some
have
of
seen the
the
light of day.
but those are some of the funniest moments, and I feel like some of these newer players, like I'll just throw out a name like 04, for example. Like, obviously he was only in the league for half a year last year, but I really don't know much
Yeah.
about it. I don't even know 0 real name, to be honest.
Yeah.
So, like, obviously guys like Apathy, I couldn't say his last name, but I have a pretty good idea of how to spell it
Yeah.
and whatever. Um,
There's a Z in there.
yeah. And that's just like the difference there between some of these guys where we've seen them stream and play for a long time versus some of these newer guys who don't stream. And obviously, there's been that never-ending debate for years now of like pro players don't have to be content creators, and you know if that's what they decide to do, then that's what they decide to do. But I mean, someone like Simp, like he turns the stream on, he's super good player. People definitely want to watch his POV, see what he's doing, see his classes, all that stuff. Um, and yeah, so I think it'll be interesting to see if there is a change in that dynamic. But in terms of streaming scrims, I don't expect there to be a massive overhaul there. But I am excited for the release of Black Ops 6 because at least at launch and until like some decent amount of time before the first event, I feel like we'll have some good stream scrim quality content there.
Yeah, it's real hit and miss. Certainly, when Twitch was blowing up and competitive COD was blowing up, everybody started streaming. Like, there was not a pro player that did not really try to make content. And I think it worked for a lot of them. Now it's less of an emphasis. But I wonder, I'll bring this up, the report by Jacob Hale, that there will be no more minimum salary requirements in the Call of Duty League starting this season. So it had been, $55,000 per year, as stated by the CDL. Now Jacob is reporting that teams will instead have to abide by minimum salaries in the states in which they operate. So really the minimum wage. That's basically what they have to abide by in a sense. And I'm sure guys are not getting paid $7.25 an hour or whatever it is. But even to that point, like, will this kind of change in the salary dynamic? Will that change how players view extra content, or will they prioritize it more because it is a potential revenue source? Twitch subs, Twitch donations, YouTube AdSense, that kind of stuff. I tend to think not. I think the players that want to do it are already kind of doing it. And maybe there will be like a player here or there that will say, okay, like, I'm not making as much money by just competing in the CDL, so I'll take this opportunity of like this fame, if you want to call it that, but like this extra notoriety that I have by being one of the few CDL players, and now I'm going to stream every day. I'm going to make YouTube videos. I don't think it's going to have a huge impact, but I do just kind of wonder in general if it will have an effect on players that will feel more incentivized to at least try to make up the difference. But I don't necessarily think this is a good thing. What do you think about the CDL reportedly getting rid of a minimum salary?
Yeah, I immediate reaction and first thought really is it's only a good thing. I feel like that the Legion franchise is no longer in the CDL after
They
this.
got a sniff of this and they were like, we're out.
But I will say I don't know what the minimum wage is in Vegas and how different it would be from that 55K minimum. But either way, even if it, like, let's just say it was like it somehow works out to like 45K and is slightly lower than what the minimum is, like the Legion franchise would be trying to uh you know lower that price and get as close to that quote unquote minimum as they could. At least based on everything we've heard about the way the organization has allegedly been run over the past few years while it was in the CDL. But we don't have to worry about that because they're no longer involved in the league. So, yeah, I definitely am not a huge fan of this. But again, I like kind of like you said, I don't know how the minimum shakes out in all these states and whatnot, and I don't know how it would work. I guess it would be similar to like working remotely with all the teams like playing out of Texas, but
Yeah,
like
it's based on where you play from. So that's where they would mostly get their money. But then obviously events, it's going to change because you're going to.
But if the yeah, I don't know. I don't know how all that stuff works, so I'm not gonna pretend they do and try to talk about it. But either way, yeah, I think if it's anything that lowers what that previous minimum would be, then it's not a good thing for the players. But it obviously is a good thing for some of these organizations that are looking for ways to save money. So hurts the players, helps the orgs, CDL as like a business. it's trying to continue to stay afloat, then it wants its orgs to remain in the league too. And from that perspective, like, it kind of makes sense to me. But
Hmm.
um, I definitely just think it's something that, you know, unless there is some way that like the minimum in these states makes it so everybody would be making more than 50,000, then uh, I don't see how this could be a positive for the players. But um, there have been plenty of reports now, really, over the last couple of years about the player salaries, and we even had the thing last time about Optic potentially asking players to take a pay cut. So they might not have players being on the minimum or close to what the minimum was before, but maybe salaries are starting to not be as inflated as they got very quickly, and might be a little bit of you know some fixes there to just what's been going on with the inflated salaries and whatnot.
So Texas has the same minimum wage as the federal minimum wage, which is $7.25 an hour, which is equates to about $15,000 a year. I mean, that's saying that they would pay them a minimum wage.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I don't think that'll happen, but I could see a younger, more desperate player being incentivized to kind of take something along those lines, like where it's like, okay, like they're going to be really dirt poor, but that's also just kind of how it goes. Like I don't really know. Like there's no, unless the players want to unionize and then become like this entity that can collectively bargain, then they're really not going to get a say in this kind of stuff. And that's just kind of how it goes. And obviously the CDL has to think about like what it's going to do, like long term, how they're going to be able to make sure that the league is sustainable. Maybe this is the way to do it. If you think about, this is probably just going to deflate salaries in general, not just the minimums, but I'm sure the CDL would love that. I think the CDL would very much welcome, players not making hundreds of thousands of dollars that are probably pretty difficult to make up in the back end. So we'll see how it works out. But yeah, I tend to agree that it doesn't seem like it would be good for the players, and I have a hard time believing like it could be. But we'll see. I didn't watch any of the streaming stuff, but I did see people talking about the OPTIC versus OPTIC matchup, the Dynasty versus the OPTIC Texas team. I don't know if you watched it, but I did see the reactions, and people were very hyped about Team Dynasty.
Yeah, I didn't even know it was happening until somebody messaged me that the last map was like a 20-point club or something on Yemen Hardpoint, and I was like, I didn't even know this was happening today. But the Optic Dynasty, those boys still got it, and they were frying the current Optic team. I know like Kenny had a funny tweet about like Black Ops 2 sucking, and like I think Shots, you might have said like, or it was Kenny, somebody said something about like, if these guys, referring to Dynasty, if these guys are playing on that delay before and they're frying like that, they're just gods. So might be something that I have to go back and watch if it was really that funny. But yeah, see, I mean that's a cool idea for an organization like Optic. Like they really have that opportunity, especially with just the fandom of those players on the Dynasty team. But even the team like FAZE, like with guys like Zuma and someone like Clay now, if he's not competing in the league and even like enable to that extent, like some of these orgs have the potential to do something similar, and I think that's a cool idea. Even maybe 100 Thieves with like Octane and JCap and those guys, like there's some opportunities for orgs to potentially try to replicate an idea like this, and you don't expect it to be as successful as something for Optic just because of the names and the brand and the fandom and all that. But I definitely like this as an idea. I wish I had more of an idea that was happening. I tuned in, but um, definitely very interesting that the dynasty team was able to take care of business. I know Pred was on like a vacation and overseas for a very long time, it felt like, and I think Dashy had just got back to Texas too, so might not have been in prime form for some of the current players, but nonetheless, probably just all in good fun, and it might be something I'll check out. So if you guys didn't either, recommend taking a look at that.
I just think the CDL should be doing some of this stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, you mentioned the 2K and 5Ks earlier. Like, I'm kind of nostalgic about them now. Like, they were getting annoying near the end
yeah,
because there's just so many of them. But I miss them. I miss the content that they delivered on a regular basis. The CDL probably should be working with Hitch and Optic and those guys to do these throwback tournaments, like officially, like do them on the CDL channel and have casters. Like, I don't know, have Hastro put on a mic for a day, have Fwiz come back for a day, and just do a little bit of commentary on some BO2. Like, I think that's stuff, especially during the off season where there's, we've been done since June, so it's been like 4 months so far, and we haven't had anything in terms of competitive. Have guys like do like an 8 team like throwback tournament where you're bringing back these guys that were, really great 10 years ago, and just try to stir up some kind of attention. And I just think it would be a lot better. And then obviously during the season, I'm cool if they want to bring back the occasional 2K or 5K. Probably not like every weekend, twice a weekend. That's a little overkill. But especially on the weeks where we don't have a ton of content, or maybe the breaks in between, like actually going to tournaments, maybe we get a 2K, and I think it would be fun, but I'm sure people feel otherwise about some of that stuff. But yeah, I think that about it does it. I don't know if you had anything else. So we will be back at some point, obviously. We will see what happens with the new rosters, if any rosters, get confirmed, or maybe some things change in terms of like what we were talking about might not be relevant at all in the next few days, as is tradition with the Ego Chall Podcast. But you can subscribe, like, or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. Make sure to give it a 5-star rating on the podcast on Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter at JBink with 2Ks, at Preston Byers, and the podcast stores at Ego Chall Podcast. And like I said, we'll be back at some point to talk more Call of Duty esports, and keep you updated about what's going on in the off season. Obviously, the beta is coming up, so that's a good time, if ever, to talk more about COD. But yeah, I think that about does it for me. Bink, take it away.
yeah. Thank you guys as always. Just want to let everyone know too that I was laid off from Dot Esports at the end of last month. So now your support for the Ego Child podcast and everything means more than even before, because potentially until I get another job, this is really all I got going on for me at this point. So maybe you'll find a way to try and do some more content for the channel and whatnot around Black Ops 6, and maybe, I don't know, we'll see what we can do there. But maybe if any of you guys have been on the fence about subscribing to the YouTube or following on Twitch and whatnot, would really appreciate whatever support you're able to share with us now. Hopefully, as the season goes on here, we'll have even more stuff for you guys. I've been covering COD esports now since 2015, and as it looks right now, this might be the first season in literally almost a decade where I'm not actively writing about what's going on in the CDL, but that also just means I'll have a little bit more time to talk about it, I guess, on the podcast and whatnot. So it could be a good thing for you guys, and could be a little bit more incentive for you to show support if, like I said, you've been on the fence about it and whatnot. So thank you guys, as always, for everything leading up to this point, and hopefully bigger and brighter days ahead for the Ego Child podcast as we get here pretty close, like I said, almost a week away from Black Ops 6 launch. So excited for that. Excited for seeing some of these teams get confirmed and in action once the game drops. So hope you guys enjoy this episode. Hopefully we'll see you again here not too far away. And yeah, until then, remember to send the chow.